All right, I think that we are 3 minutes past 11, or depending on where you are. But nonetheless, all right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining today's session. For those who joined our previous webinar, welcome back. And for those who are new here, also welcome. Today is the second part of a series titled Funding Climate Action and Beyond, where we aim to support companies and individuals in understanding the role of carbon credits and projects in fighting climate change. So last week, for those who joined us, we spoke on how credits can deliver the financing to critical climate projects. And today, this webinar is ensuring the excellence in carbon credits and projects, right? So where we dive deep into the topic of understanding what makes credits and projects of high integrity, right? So at South Pole, we believe, we need a future in which society has not just the ambition and ability, but also the confidence in the markets to address climate change on the scale that's required, right? Next slide, please. All right, cool. I think it's on now. So some housekeeping rules for all participants. If you haven't already realized, you'll be on mute. With that said, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. We do have some time for Q&A at the end of the session, and we can kind of address them. But otherwise, we will aim to get back to all the questions via email, right? And last but not least, I think just full disclosure, this session will be recorded. So we would be disseminating the recording links after this session, right? Next slide, please. All right, so before we dive deep into the content, maybe I'll just spend some time to introduce myself and maybe my fellow speaker, Pim, if she's already on. But so I'll go first. My name is Sean, and I'm part of the business development team at South Pole, based out of Singapore, where we cover the Asia Pacific region, right? A bit about myself. I first started my career at EDB, or the Singapore Economic Development Board, where I covered the energy sector, right? So for those who are familiar, it's the companies that are on Jurong Island, right? And subsequently, I joined management consulting at McKinsey, first in their energy practice, before subsequently joining their sustainability practice, right? There we support clients in crafting decarbonization strategies, creating new green businesses, amongst other things, right? And now at South Pole, we support corporates of all shapes and sizes across all industry verticals who are on their climate journey. Joining me later, I think, would be Pim. She's a senior manager at the in our climate projects team. She leads the sustainable technologies team in Southeast Asia. She's based out of Thailand. Who I think she has a wealth of experience, getting projects from 0 to 1, right? Essentially on how do you generate the credits and issue the credits out of these projects. All right. So next slide, please. So just a quick introduction about South Pole, if you don't already know us. So South Pole was started in 2006 by a group of university friends in Switzerland. And 16 years later, right, we have grown now to over 1,300 people in about 50 locations. And we have helped channel finance to over 850, I think maybe even 900 projects today, and supporting thousands of companies to reduce their climate impact, right? And through this journey, also becoming one of the largest carbon project developers in the world today, right? And I think what is really exciting is that we are only just getting started. Okay, so very mindful of time, let's just dive straight into the content. Next slide, please. All right, so just to set the stage, right? I mean, the carbon credits has really kind of only exploded into mainstream in the past couple of years, right? When I say it's getting caught out there, what I'm referring to is actually, the velocity of media coverage, academic journals that are pushing out articles and analysis, and right now I think it's really a lot of interest in this topic, and rightfully so, right? But the truth of the matter is that, at South Pole, we actually welcome this lively and robust discussion, right? I mean, it tells us that people care, and it makes our work a bit more meaningful, right? The scrutiny is absolutely vital for a healthy and optimized market. And I mean, if you think about it, it's compared to the other commodities market, right? The carbon market is fairly nascent, right? We're only probably about 10 to 20 years in, but it is interestingly a market that is going to evolve and improve with new developments in technologies, regulations, and best practices, right? So I think this is a space that's really exciting. And I mean, for everyone in the call here, I think this is why you're very interested in what carbon credits can do, right? Next slide, please. All right, but I think what is very crucial is that it's about doubling down on understanding the integrity of carbon credits, right? The topic of integrity is actually not new. What we have seen is actually just more of a renewed focus and urgency, right? The gaps and the flaws that the press are in fact highlighting right now are exactly what academia or experts who have been working on these projects have been advocating for years, right? What's actually happening is that there's a lack of budgets, or maybe they had to just work on shoestring budgets, and these were maybe not as robust as before. But with that said, right, I think today, with so much money flowing into these carbon projects, many of these project developers, are using the opportunity to double down on these efforts to improve the integrity and quality of these carbon credits, right? So, and here the definition of high integrity varies to a degree, right? But generally it includes sound measurements of emission reductions, additionality, no double counting, social safeguards, compliance with laws and regulations, and co-benefits, right? So these are certain factors that we look at in determining the integrity of the credits itself, right? Next slide, please. And and as part of this ecosystem, right, there are kind of there's a who's who, right, in ensuring these credits are of high integrity. So I mean, starting from the left, right, we have organizations who try to inform the credit integrity, and then in the middle we have people who uphold it, and then last but not least we have the organizations that comment on it, right? So we start from the left, right, where the organizations inform the integrity. We have industry bodies like I see ICROA, right? And these include certification standards and methodologies. They set the criteria. They help inform what these standards should look like, right? For the certification standards, such as Gold Standard and project developers, they fall squarely in the middle, where they uphold this credit quality, right? So they are using principles from ICROA, ICBCM to kind of model their methodology, to develop their methodologies, and then they, as such, set the standards for project developers to adhere to, right? And then on the right side, essentially, for those who comment on credit integrity, these are effectively your regulators, your government organizations, who kind of give a sense of what is actually accepted or what is considered high integrity, right? So they kind of comment on what is viewed as potentially a high integrity credits, right? But nonetheless, all these three need to work together. They work collaboratively to ensure that these work are complementary, and it does not create extra red tape or extra confusion that is already in a very complex market, right? But with that said, right, I mean, for those who are in this call, I think maybe you're more interested in the VCM or the voluntary carbon markets. Today, the VCM is actually not really regulated. So as such, these actors here actually underpin the market, right? These organizations, they set the standard, they uphold, and they continuously update their principles to ensure that real and measurable impacts from the projects are actually delivered, right? So in the voluntary space, I think it's important for all three buckets of these archetypes to really kind of to work well together to kind of create a very concise playbook, right, that everyone can kind of align themselves to. All right, next slide, please. Right, so there are a few, so what do we do at South Pole, right? So there are a few key initiatives that we try to align ourselves to. So for example, I think I'll just focus in the middle, the ICBCM, which it stands for the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets. The ICBCM actually just released their new guidance for quality carbon credits, which is the CCP, right? The Core Carbon Principles, earlier this year. So effectively what it means is that the CCP, which we'll deep dive a bit later into, tells us exactly that the standards or the principles that a high integrity credit should adhere to, right? And upon meeting and adhering to these standards, ICBCM will come in and give their stamp of approval for the carbon credit certifiers, right? So once you get that stamp, right, Verra Gold Standard ACR, which is the American Carbon Registry, will have to demonstrate how these credits were generated, show that there are genuine emission reductions or there are genuine removals with scientific methods, and also adhere to rules that respect the rights of the indigenous and local communities, right? So the label that ICVCM, just to get that label, is a very robust process, which goes through many layers of scrutiny. And I think this is just one example of how the market is trying to instill confidence in the standards to ensure that these credits are of high integrity, right? So with that said, I think market initiatives like these, and there are many of them, help encourage standards to move faster in developing a very high integrity market for everyone to access, right? Next slide, please. So just double clicking here into the CCP, right, the core carbon principles from ICVCM. They are effectively a set of interlinked principles to define a kind of like a threshold standard to ensure the integrity, right? The principles here were developed with inputs from hundreds of organizations throughout the VCM, right? And the CCPs effectively provide a credible and rigorous means of identifying these high integrity carbon credits that if kind of signal that they create real verifiable climate impact, right? So they are kind of bucketed here into three kind of facets here. The first one on the top right, I guess effectively, is emission impact, then also governance, and then the last but not least, sustainable development, right? I think what probably is the more crucial ones that I wanted to highlight are three, right? The first one being additionality. For those who are familiar with it, or not familiar with it, right, effectively it means that the sequestration of avoided emissions must be additional to what would have otherwise occurred without this intervention, right? So that means you must demonstrate that this is above and beyond, right? For permanence, I think the sequestration of the avoided emissions must have a durability against reversal, right? In short, that the carbon emissions that are removed or stored should not leak ideally into the environment or the atmosphere, usually for at least 100 years, right? And last but not least, I think no double counting. So what this means is that a single carbon credit should only be associated with a single removal of a ton of CO2, right? So there is no double counting by both, say, a carbon project and also at a government GHG level, right? So this means that the moment a credit is retired, they are given a unique serial number. So this ensures that, and this is fully transparent and public, to ensure that the credits can only be used once, right? So these are some of the few ways that the markets are trying to instill the credit, the worthiness and the integrity in the market to give, market participants like corporates the confidence in investing in these carbon projects, right? So our next page is on upholding credit integrity. I think Pim is online now. Pim, would you like to take this on?
Okay, sure, that's good then. Yes, so I'll take over on the major carbon standards that that I think Sean has mentioned a bit now. So for the carbon certification standards, established rules, requirements, and procedures for all stages of project development until the managing the public registry of the carbon credits, means that like to monitor where the carbon credits are transferred to, or how they are retired or cancelled or issued. So there are many carbon standards in the world, like the main standards are Verified Carbon Standard of Verra, Gold Standard, or GCC, Global Carbon Council. And then there are some regional or national standards like in Australia or America. And finally, there are technology-specific standards like Plan Vivo and Plural Earth. Next, please. So on what type of projects can be funded, there can be like many types of projects, and for each standards they develop their own methodologies to calculate the emission reductions for each type of project. And then for the methodology, like it can be developed by either like independent organizations such as South Pole, where we have developed the biochar methodology with Verra last year, or like developed by the standard itself. So for each, regardless, like for each methodology, like there will always has to go through public consultations, peer review panels, and auditing process before they are getting approved. And after that, like if there's any new science or based practice like developed, the methodology will be revised and reviewed again. Next, please. So these are the certification process. Like I would like to separate it into two sections. Like the first part is the project development and registration, and then the later part is the carbon credit issuance, which can be repeated like for each monitoring period. Now it can take like a year or like more depending on the type of the project or technology. But then like what I would like to focus here is that like for each key like milestone of the project development or credit issuance, like we always involved with the third party like auditor, like to validate and verify the project before the project's being registered or credits being issued. Next, please. So like how our certification standard improve integrity? Like the first one is by the project developing process itself that require like extensive documentation that need to go through, and then like have to work with the third party auditor. And then of course like there's like a clear and open feedback loop for the expert review. And finally, like there's always a stakeholder consultations of the project. Apart from that, like there's always like new improvement and developing of the new methodologies, like such as like a biochar project, or like if a nature-based solution that need to have the methodologies like review or like improve like from time to time. And finally, like there's always a new technology like to improve the monitoring of the project, like for example the digital MRV systems. Next, please. Now, I would like to focus on the like about the Red Plus project that we've been there's been a lot of like a buzz like talking about in like on social media. Now, when we talk about like developing the carbon credits, the carbon credits is the difference between the baseline emission and the project emission. So the importance is that to identify the baseline emission of the project. Next, please. So these are the standard like steps like to ensure the accuracy of the forest protection project. Like the first one is to find the baseline of the project. Like for the Rest Plus project, like a similar area of the project is chosen as a reference. For example, like the road, the population of the around the area, and then after that, like we will have every 6 years, like the baseline will be reviewed like by the third party auditor, like to make sure that the baseline are up to date and in line. Maybe we can like click to the next graphic. Yes, and the next one. And yes, and then like if the baseline of the project like compared to the like the actual observed rate, and then if the observed rate is lower, then the fewer credits will be issued. If higher, of course, like the higher credits will be issued, which mean like the more finance will go into the project. And then finally, like as a result, like we will have the project that can last for like 100 years. Yes, and then we can go to the next slide. So on now, like how to uphold the credit integrity as a project developer, like we have like discussed before that the standards like have very specific like steps and requirement to make sure that the projects can produce like high quality credits. Apart from that, like for South Pole, like we also like initiate our like own like extra steps like to make sure that the projects has like the credits has high integrity. So the first one is that we establish our own like tech strategy and risk criteria and then the next one is like our own due diligence, like that include the KYC or quick project assessment or full project assessment and initial risk assessment. And then the next one is also like the annual quality control reports, like to make sure that all of our projects are still like up to not only like the standard requirement, but up to like additionality requirement as well. And then finally, like we will have like a peer and expert review on the deliverables of the credits and like additional auditing if required. So I think I will next page, I will hand it back to Sean.
All right, thank you, Pim. All right, so I think on the last section, right, on which is essentially, I think, if you recall the archetypes on organizations that comment on the credit integrities, I think increasingly there are also, the space for carbon rating agencies who are popping up in the market, right? These carbon rating agencies, they seek to essentially kind of emulate the likes of the S&Ps, your Moody's, or your Morningstars, right, who are already in the public equities market, right? So as a result, these credit agencies kind of add another layer of transparency and integrity into the market, right? So these companies, effectively, what they do is that they evaluate different credits, including their baseline, their performance, both actual and estimated, and other characteristics, and provide kind of a rating, right? It can be A, can be Bs or triple Bs, etc., and on what they consider a quality credit, right? Each rater, right, be it Severa, Calix, or Renoster, right, they have their own evaluation criteria. So effectively, it's not an apple for apple comparison, but usually they are aligned with best practices, right, such as, again, additionality and permanence, right? The credits are usually remotely evaluated and given a score against these criteria, right? So we believe that these ratings can lead to an enhancement of the quality assurance from the certification standards. But with that said, at South Pole, we believe that these credit rating agencies should be harmonized with sound common principles that are kind of put out by the certification bodies or the industry bodies, right? With that said, also South Pole, we work with these credit rating agencies to ensure that there is that the credit for kind of applicable projects, that there are also these scores tied to it, right? So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your South Pole representative on these scores. Next slide, please. All right. So again, maybe just to lay of the land, right? The VCM market, which is the voluntary carbon market, again, is unregulated. But with that said, I think compliance schemes, largely driven by government regulatory bodies or international schemes, right? And these usually popped up within the past few years, are starting to see both of these markets kind of converge, right? And what I mean by that is that governments or organizations such as the UN are often supported by various agencies or advisory groups that are made up of these industry experts. These organizations have the power to dictate, right, who will need to offset their emissions, how many emissions needs to be addressed, and what kind of quality credits qualify, right? And effectively, these credits signal to the market as an indicator, right, what kind of credits are of certain quality, so to say, right? For example, in Singapore, we have the carbon tax, which NCCS, I think by the second half of this year, will announce or release a list of credits that they deem as high integrity. In Australia, there is a safeguard mechanism, and I think for Indonesia, the KLHK is also developing its own, as it develops its own cap and trade system. They are also kind of thinking about their own methodologies behind what is considered a allowed credit. Right, so that's on the left side of the house, right? On the right side, where it's more of the international schemes, we have the likes of ICAO, which is effectively CORSIA, which covers the aviation sector, right? CORSIA is a scheme for addressing the CO2 emissions that are generated by flights, right, between countries, right? And already we are now, I think, in this first phase. The pilot phase is ending end of this year. And already ICAO has already approved certain credits for CORSIA. And what we are seeing effectively is that these approved credits trade at a slight premium towards, say, the non-qualified credits, right? So again, this convergence of both the compliance market and the voluntary markets, we're starting to see, the kind of premiums, seen as a indicator of the integrity and the trustworthiness of these credits itself. Next page. I think one before, yeah. So this is my last slide here. I think the key message here is that carbon credits are built on the foundation of robust principles, right? And these are always refreshed with constant learnings and with the latest proven climate science, right? So there is a lot of work that is done by the industry, by academia, to kind of improve the integrity and the quality of the carbon markets, right? Hopefully, in our view, these developments will reduce the confusion, we overcome market fragmentation, and give buyers confidence that the funding of projects, make a real, genuine impact on emissions, right? This is, I think, fundamental to us, right? Fundamental. A high integrity voluntary carbon market can accelerate the uptake of emerging technologies. I think as Pim mentioned, biochar is one thing that significant amount of investments have gone into. The monies also can be used to protect and promote nature and biodiversity, and put vital fundings in the hands of the indigenous peoples and local communities, right, who are effectively the best stewards for these carbon sinks, right? They live there, they work there, so they are the best stewards that we can ask for. So with that said, right, so it is, I think, really fundamental that these actors throughout the market advocate for a globally accepted, harmonized quality assurance scheme, right? And what we hope to see is that with this higher integrity in the market, the price they pay for these carbon credits also matches the real abatement costs, and also therefore allows for higher quality processes to kind of track and monitor and verify these potential carbon removal and abatement emissions, right? So this is the last slide. I think I just wanted to leave that with you here. Thank you all for listening to our webinar. And I would actually welcome now, if there are any questions, to please type it in the chat, and we will maybe spend a couple of minutes to answer maybe a couple of them. Okay, I think I see one here. Which is a great question, right? So the question is, how can we be sure that the emission reductions are actually being achieved, right? So I would take it as kind of I'll look at it from two sides, right? The first one is obviously that the governance systems must be in place, right? And I think just going back to the three archetypes that we mentioned, the industry bodies, the certification bodies, the registries, and even the government regulators, right? They all play a part in measuring and certifying the actual impact of these credits, right? So they set up the framework on how these should be kind of like calculated and how they should be retired, right? So I think, and if I think about it, right, there are actually very few kind of other financing mechanisms or instruments that can claim this level of transparency, as carbon credits, right? So that's the first point. I think the second point is that then if you double click down at a credit level, each carbon credit is actually assigned a unique serial number, meaning that once it's retired or claimed, it cannot be used again, right? So this is to prevent double counting. I think this also kind of adds that sense of robustness into the system, because this registry is entirely public. Anyone can go and log into Verra or Gold Standard to look at the credits that have been retired by the organizations. So we believe that it adds a layer of kind of a trust in the system. And I think separately also the project documentations, right, such as the original project design document, the PDDs, the monitoring reports, they are also available on the public registry. So I think the fact that it's so transparent and it is open for public scrutiny is one way to kind of instill confidence in the markets, right? Another question I'm seeing is, maybe this might be better for Pim, but effectively, what are the biggest challenges when you're developing projects? Pim, would you like to take that on?
Sure. So yes, the biggest challenges when developing the projects are to identify the baseline of the project, and of course compare it to the actual expected project activities. Because we need both of that to be clearly demonstrated, of course, comparing according to the methodologies set, and then use that to calculate the estimated the emission reduction or the carbon credits that the project would generate. Of course, it's different from each type of the projects, but this part will be the part that we spend most of our time in developing the projects. Apart from that, the monitoring plan of the projects is also a challenge as well. For example, for the Red Plus projects, or the project that require to work with a lot of large area or involved with many stakeholders, well planned and transparent monitoring plan is very crucial to the whole project development.
All right, thank you, Pim. I'm looking at the time. I think we're 3 minutes past 11:30. So thank you. I think that's all the time we have. So thank you everyone for joining us. Right. For those who are interested, we have a webinar next week on I think Tuesday at the same time, titled "Crafting Your Funding Climate Action Strategy." Right. So there, my colleagues will share and walk you through how corporates or your company can embed these learnings today and last week into their climate journey. Right. So I mean, again, thank you for your time, and I hope to see everyone there next week. Right, thank you.